Hello and welcome to Michigan Gardener, June 2023. Lots going on this month. Things are starting to come into flower. I guess you'd call this like late spring, early summer. In front of me is, last year I planted this whole garden, but in front of me I planted this as well. This is a bowl of beauty poppy that's gone through one round of blooms and very shortly will go through another. These peonies like this tend to fade pretty quickly. So I like them kind of dotted in and not how I grew up seeing them, which is a big line of them, because once they're done and they're only good for a week or two. On either side of me is a rose called Cinco de Mayo, and some sort of bug has attacked them a little bit, but I think they'll be okay. These will go on blooming until first frost. Then you may remember that we planted a box hedge, and probably by the end of the year it'll be time to at least trim the top of it. One or two of them are getting closer together. I kind of want them to grow together and then create a nice low uniform hedge all around here. To the right here we had purple sensation alliums, and those have kind of gone over, and now we're getting another allium in there. What's that one called? Snow something or other?
I'll have to look it up. It's white.
Anyway, it's a white allium that's blooming, so those kind of stagger just a little bit. Another thing you might notice is that those janky bushes that were behind me that somebody let get out of control, and then I pruned them and I just didn't like the way they looked, so we pulled all of them out, and now we've planted 12 yew bushes, and that will turn into a topiaryized yew hedge that will separate this from the planting behind us. I'm holding in my sweaty little fingers a packet of seed. Now this seed here won the prestigious Royal Horticultural Society's Award of Garden Merit. And if you don't know what that is, every year all the plants get together and they have a rip-roaring competition to see which is the best in the garden. And this plant won it. Sometimes plants pull dirty tricks. Like for instance, one year there was a flowering plant and another plant paid some dogs to walk by. And when the judger went by, she smelled a flower and she goes, "Dog farts," and she disqualified the plant. It's cutthroat. So this plant is called Mexican fleabane. And the scientific name for it, and this is really important because there's a bunch of different plants that go by Mexican fleabane, you have to make sure you get the right one. It's called Erigeron carvinskianus. Erigeron is a combination of two Greek words, eri meaning early and geron meaning old man, and that comes from the fact that the flowers when they just first come out have some white hair on them. And carvinskianus comes from a German, like Bavarian, I'm not even sure, he's like a naturalist or something, but he had some plants and animals named after him. He lived from 1780 to 1855. So carvinskianus means Karvinsky's butthole. Now, that being said, these seeds are really small, and supposedly there's like 1,000 seeds in here, and I'd believe it. There's no way I'm going to be able to individually plant these seeds, so I've prepared 2 seed trays with seedling compost, which is sterile. Not a lot of nutrients in there, but we don't need it really. What we want to do is get these well rooted, and after the first few true leaves come out, then we'll take whatever we get out of this sowing and put it into other little pots. So I'm just going to take a sprinkle of these seeds, and there's really no way to grab them. I just kind of have to just sprinkle them randomly around. And you don't want to cover these seeds up because they need light to germinate. So we're just randomly sprinkling them around. I've already pre-moistened and pre-watered this compost with the idea that I don't want to water it and have all the seeds end up running into one little area. This should take between 2 and 3 weeks to germinate. And again, as long as we keep the soil moist and the seeds in sun, we should be okay. Hopefully we'll get some seedlings out of here. We'll see, you never know. Gardening is an experiment. It's not always certain how the outcome's going to be. But if we should get some plants out of here, they're hardy. Zone 5, which is even north of me, so that's good enough, and hardy throughout most of England. And it produces a plant, kind of a bushy, low to the ground plant. The flowers start out white and then they turn pink. So you'll have 2 different kinds of flowers on the same plant, and they grow very vigorously and they spread. So I'm going to try to use this out by the vegetable garden and also in various beds where it'd be kind of nice to have some variations in the plants that are there, and also a little bit of ground cover to help keep weeds down.
Yesterday on a whim, I decided to run to my happy spot, Wedel's, and buy a bunch of plants to plant up what was a very bare area where we had taken out an invasive species called an autumn olive. This area is really shaded for most of the day, but mid-afternoon it does get some western exposure sun. Kyle had bought a lace cap hydrangea, and I think that it will like the light here. We had 3 hydrangea that the deer have been kind of munching on since we moved in that I dug up. They were kind of over in that vicinity, and I'm gonna see how they do. It's worth trying to save them. In the foreground we've got Lady's Mantle. I need a few more plants to pop in to make 5. Lamium, which is a beautiful ground cover in the forefront that's very, very easy to grow. It will even grow under pine trees. Some Japanese forest grass, Bleeding Heart, which is something you want to nestle in amongst other things because it does die back. This is a beautiful plant called an Aralia Sun King. It dies back in the fall and it gets quite big. It will grow in almost full shade. Some Astilbe. And then we made some rare finds. These are bear's breeches, acanthus. They're going to get very tall and they have spiky flowers that are really cool. They have to be planted a few feet apart, so they're really going to fill in the back. And this is a woodland plant that will grow in full shade. It's called Rogurgia. And it gets these beautiful large leaves, dinner plate size, and flowers that pop up out of the top. Okay, out here where we made a little planting, we've got Indian paintbrush blooming, and we're going to add some Texas blue bonnets, which we did try and start by seed, but sometimes that's easier said than done.
We did get 5 seedlings, however.
We got 5 seedlings, and we planted them into plugs and are going to go ahead and just kind of dot them around the middle and hope they take. Texas blue bonnets are a relative of lupins. They are an annual that tends to reseed itself. The soil out here is really sandy, so they should like it.
All right, the last time this planter was on the show, I'd planted some layered spring bulbs in the anticipation that this spring I would have gotten some glorious displays of tulips and all sorts of other things, but unfortunately none of that happened. The bulbs all rotted. I think it got too much moisture, and then there was freeze-thaw all winter, and it just didn't work out. So it's time to plant up our summer / into early fall planter here, and I decided that I wanted to put plants in here even though they aren't like classic plants. I wanted to put plants in here that I could use elsewhere in the garden in the coming years. And so here is a plant I picked mainly because of the foliage. It just stood out to me when I was walking by. And the name of this plant, let's see, is Heliopsis helianthoides. So Heliopsis is from Greek, Helios is sun, and opsis is like sun-like. So they get yellow flowers that look like the sun. And the helianthoides part of this is also Greek, and it's like a sunflower is what that means. So this is false flower, and then the particular name of the breed is Sunstruck. So I have 3 of these, and I'm gonna just kind of cram them in there. Obviously that's going to be a lot of plant for this amount of space, but I don't care because they're not going to stay in there forever. It's all right if they get a little cramped over the summer here. Oof, and let's do another one. These like full sun They're a perennial that should be hardy to where I live, which is zone 6A. And this next plant I'm planting is called Jewel of the Desert Sunstone, ice plant at Delosperma. So Delosperma is also Greek. It means Delo meaning visible and sperma meaning seed. So that's because when this goes to seed, there's no membrane over the seed capsule so you can see the seeds and things. It's deer resistant. You can trample on it. It's kind of a succulent, and it should, if we're lucky, spill over the sides of the pot. So, you know, kind of maybe if we're lucky, we'll get kind of that classic planter look. The main reason I chose this, if I'm to be honest, is because I liked the contrast of the foliage of this and the flowers of this with the yellow flowers that we'll get from our false sunflower. Now, I bought 3 of the little succulent things, but doesn't look like it's gonna fit, so I'll fill in a little bit of the rest of the dirt here. This is just a mix of regular potting soil with some grit mixed in. Both of these plants like nicely draining soil, so important that they get plenty of drainage. Very few, very few, vanishingly few plants like wet feet, so it's never the wrong answer to put more drainage in than less. So now that we've got these planted, we'll give them a nice drink of water here. And we'll follow this planter throughout the year, and hopefully we'll see some nice things out of it, and then next year we'll have some plants to put out.
We're out in Nellie's garden, and we have a lot of changes happening out here, and one thing that we're really working toward is getting a succession of blooms so that this more formal area will have something in bloom all spring, summer, and hopefully into the fall. Kyle accidentally planted an annual jasmine. This is a Brazilian jasmine, and it did not make it through the winter, but he's found a really good alternative for behind the bowl of beauty peony that is going to come into its own after the peony is done showing off. This is called a rose mallow, or it can also be known as a hardy hibiscus. It comes back every year. They have beautiful, this variety has beautiful large light pink blooms, which is kind of reminiscent of the bowl of beauty peony, and the blooms have dark pink centers, so that will pick up on the beautiful Cinco de Mayo roses, which will be in bloom all season through the summer. We've grown these before. They do not require a lot of pampering, so they're very similar to a peony in that regard. All you have to do is dig a hole, plop it in, cover it up, and water it, and we should be good to go. Now, this plant does get quite big, so like maybe 5 to 6 feet tall, but the beauty of it is you cut it back in the winter time, and it's going to stay very small until after the peony is done showing off, so it won't compete at all for the limelight. Kyle selected a dark leaf version, which is going to be really nice because it mimics the dark leaves of the Ligularia behind me. This also comes in a form that has bright green leaves and deep pink blossoms. I'm going to kind of concentrate on covering it with the soil that it came in rather than our clay. just because rose mallows are kind of, mallows are all field flowers, and they tend to not like to get bogged down in the soil. So in closing, we've got the alliums that come up first in the spring, and then they're followed by the roses, then the peony. Then this is going to be popping up with the poppies in the background, and later in the summer we'll have crocosmia and butterfly weed and purple coneflower and garden phlox flowering. So we should have a nice long season of color out here.
The tomatoes are doing really well. Everything's about knee to mid-thigh high out here, except for this one plant. And it hasn't really grown at all since we put it in the ground. And this is the kind of situation where it might be smart just to cut your losses, because that's never going to turn into a tomato plant that produces any kind of tomatoes for you. So I got a replacement plant. Gretchen chose a tomato called the Whopper. So hopefully it'll be good. This is the same situation that led to me figuring out that Old Germans were so good last year. The only reason we got Old Germans was because I had to replace a couple of the plants, and so here we are in that same situation, replacing a tomato plant. So maybe this is good luck, and maybe this will be an amazing plant for us.
Okay, we're out here on the patio getting ready to plant up a big pot of herbs, and today we're going to put in 2 different kinds of thyme, 3 oregano plants, and a sage. All of these plants like to be a little bit drier, and they like a little bit poorer soil than, say, basil. So you don't probably want to grow basil in the same herb garden as some of these other more Mediterranean herbs. I prepared the pot by putting a layer of grit down. That way the herbs won't sit in water when you water them. And then I mixed up 50-50 grit or small stones and just an all-purpose compost. And I'm going to pot these up. So just to be clear, these Mediterranean herbs have evolved to live in poorer, rockier soil like you would find in Mediterranean countries like Italy.
Well, we had a bit of rain this morning, and with it some wind, and now I have a gigantic mess to clean up. It hit some of one of our beds, but I doubt too terribly, because what it would have fallen on is some bulbs. So they probably won't flower this year, but maybe next year. And that's all she wrote for the June Michigan Gardener. You can see tomatoes are coming along. Everything is doing great in the garden, and we'll see you next month.